Any fragrance, whether it's in perfume or any other manufactured good, has 3 levels. First, you have your base notes, the essence that defines the scent. They're the longest lasting piece. If you spray perfume, these last with you throughout the entire day. Your middle notes are dynamic. They gradually change throughout your journey, but they're slow, they're consistent. Your top notes are what draw you in, that flashy thing you smell right away with the spray of a perfume bottle. Your business relies on your base notes. Your values are what you return to that give you that driven approach and longevity and reliability. Your innovative spirit, like any good middle note, has allowed you to change over time. But what you're missing are the top notes. And that's what we see when we look at the COVID-19 crisis. Your business has managed to sustain itself over the last year, but as we move forward, we have a plan to establish those top notes, a governance structure that allows you to stay dynamic and resilient. We're the Yellowhammer Consulting Team from the University of Alabama, and my name is Ella Foes.
My name is Bailey Little.
My name is Joe Clark.
And I'm Angel Peterson. In today's presentation, we'll give you an overview of the company, your fundamentals, as well as sustainability. We'll then analyze the business, your current governance structure, and the challenge proposed. We will then inform you all, the family, on how to move forward and the steps you should take to implement our recommendation. But before we move forward, we should first establish a common ground on where your family business is today. You all were founded in 1895 in Geneva, Switzerland. Y'all are the world's largest manufacturer of fragrance and flavor. You all recently celebrated over 125 years in business. Congratulations. This shows your long-term perspective and your business continuity. 10% of your total annual revenues are spent on research and development. This is the highest in the industry. You all have 6 research centers across the world, highlighting your innovation. You all have a strong ability to adapt to change in over your 100 markets. Your sustainability strategy from 2015 to 2020 was Pathways to Positive. This shows your strong unified values. You all focus on your fundamentals to drive business decisions. We have 3 founders, Felipe, Martin, and Charles, and 100% of the business was controlled by the Firmenich family starting in 1933.
These are your core fundamental principles. Your company believes in customers, people, creativity, sustainability, and legacy. This means that our recommendation cannot violate one of these core principles. Looking more into sustainability, we can see that it has been a driving force in your company. Going back from 1982, when you treated the water for 5 neighboring communities, all the way to the present as you reform the Pathways to Positivity into the Transform 25 that looks into the future, into the year 2025. Our recommendation is key to have sustainability be a key consideration. As we look at the governance structure, your family has strong governance mechanisms for strong business and governance success. At the center, you have a board of directors that gives a holistic view for the company. It also brings in the different parts to give a unified direction. Additionally, there's a strong family presence as your company is 100% owned by the family. Additionally, there in the past have never been a non-family CEO. However, that has changed just recently as the first non-family member CEO has recently been hired. This, along with the fact that there are currently no executive positions occupied by family members, as well as there being only 4 of the 9 board of directors being family members, indicates a strong change in your family's company. However, there is still a strong family presence as 100% of the company is still owned by the family. So what does this all mean? Well, the first part is that 100% ownership by the family is key to your upholding the company's core legacy value. This means that it is non-negotiable for a recommendation to split up these shares from that family-owned majority. Additionally, governance is structured upon meritocracy and putting the business first. This is shown through how non-family members now occupy key positions in the family business. Lastly, your governance structure has worked. It has brought you success in the past. Therefore, we don't want to implement any drastic changes into that governance structure. However, perhaps we could change something about it, which will be something that we'll talk about in the presentation later on. Now that we know how the company performs on the business side of things and the family side of things, we can place them in the high financial, low emotional sector of Sharma's matrix. This means that there is a high capacity for change in your company as they are well managed and they are going to put business first. The business is your main priority.
You all are interested in acquiring DRT, so let's take a quick look at their company. They were founded in 1932, specializing in plant-based chemistry. They have over 14 international production facilities, showing that they have a strong global presence. They offer over 300 high-quality ingredients, leading us to conclude that they have great diversification. Lastly, they offer green alternatives, leading to their sustainability. This leads us to our question. Should you all acquire DRT? Do they align with the short-term and long-term goals? You all have been faced with a challenge, COVID-19. It has interrupted your long-term success and your decision on whether or not to acquire DRT. You have been faced with short-term decisions, but have handled them well. Let's take a look. To get ahead of the curve, you all established an international travel ban at the end of January 2020. You continue purchasing flower petals, which is one of the leading ingredients in perfumes, even though no new perfume brands were being created. This ensured the continuity of the supply chain. Lastly, you all increased the production capacity of disinfectant solutions to 100 tons. You all also donated over 20 tons of disinfectant solutions to Geneva University Hospital. We admire your decision. This leads us to conclude that you all have great resilience.
Like Angel said, you've handled yourselves well over the past year. But we want to give some structure to that plan so that you're able to move forward with stability. And like any good fragrance has its components, our questions today do too. Before we can even establish whether or not you should acquire DRT, we want to make sure that you've institutionalized your ability to handle short-term changes as you've handled them over the past year. So we'll be asking whether or not you need to refocus on short-term governance structures, changing a few key parts of your business. Once we've answered that, we'll be able to move into the question of whether or not you should acquire DRT. So let's begin right here.
So these actions you took during the pandemic are very informative. They tell us a lot about your resilience and your focus on sustainability, yet it's important to place them in the context of the overall business market. Something we established in our research was that there are two sorts of companies during periods of pandemics. Some choose to hibernate, taking on loans to try to survive the period, which often reflects a downturn in demand, yet others are more likely to be aggressive. They recognize this as a period of opportunity and perhaps a way to increase their brand awareness and even expand. After doing research on the decisions you took during the pandemic, it became clear to us that you were in line with a more aggressive path during the pandemic. That being said, there have been some concerns about whether or not these actions reflect your overall longer-term strategy. The Transform 25 strategy, which is almost reflective of a chain of pearls where you are acquiring more companies trying to increase your brand presence, is something laudable. Yet, if we're being more aggressive in a time like the pandemic where you see a decrease in demand, are we still able to do that? And our first question would be the DRT sale. With that said, we should formalize governance during the pandemic, making sure we understand what the short-term governance is, and therefore we can make sure we are aligned and in trajectory to do what we need to do to succeed. So with that said, we look at the current governance state. We saw the crisis governance model put in place that created crisis committees and made it easier to communicate across company lines. Yet, it seemed like there was a bit of confusion on whether or not the decisions that were being made during the pandemic necessarily set the company up to be in the best position to achieve these long-term goals. Something the company established was you guys think in decades, but during a situation like the pandemic, you have to think in weeks. And so we need to make sure that the actions we take during these periods of crisis and these short-term situations align with long-term goals. We need to reduce this uncertainty. Therefore, we propose a new governance state that has oversight over quick crisis decisions while also making sure that operational decisions taken across the business and the VPs in charge align with the base notes that make this business successful. They make sure that they align with the sustainable goals, the innovation that you've taken over the years, and carry on forward. So with that, our first recommendation about the short-term governance would be to establish a new VP of inclusive development. This new VP role is going to have a variety of responsibilities. First, it's important to establish that these responsibilities only increase during times of crisis. During a period like the pandemic, there is going to be a lot more communication needed and a lot more planning done with executives. So during the times of normalcy, we see that this role would advise executive leaders on operational decisions. Their role is essentially to meet with the VPs around the company, across the different sectors, and even across the different markets to make sure that the operational decisions they're taking reflect the spirit of the company. This is done in line with the goals of Transform 25 and other decades-long plans. We need to make sure that we're not driving down the wrong path for too long a time, as that could throw us off the trajectory we need to make big things happen. So we also make sure that the company values are aligned with all these VPs, and we're able to use them to our advantage when it comes time to make big decisions like purchasing another company. In times of crisis, as I mentioned, these responsibilities increase. We like the idea of a crisis governance model where you have crisis committees forming and communication increased across the different sectors of the company. However, it's important to have formalization of this. And if we're able to streamline the communication of these ideas to one central source that's able to act as a liaison with the CEO and the other executives, we're likely to have more success. Therefore, the key communications you'll see with a role like this is regular reports to the executive leadership, these meetings with the VPs to make sure there's alignment on the responsibilities and the values that we've pushed for the past 125 years, and when necessary, meeting with the crisis committees.
Like Joe said, you're not always in a crisis state, though. These things come and go. We want you to be ready and have the tools that you need at the drop of a hat. And that's why we want to arm these people not just with these structures that they need in terms of people management, but also the tools to handle any crisis quickly, helping to guide their thinking. So we've developed a decision-making framework for inclusive development, something that this VP will oversee and use with their crisis committees to educate different sectors of the company on effective decision-making while prioritizing both short-term and long-term growth. The key components that we've identified begin with aligning with your financial strategy. This is one of the drivers that has brought you success so far. You want to pursue financial strength, profitable growth, and return on assets. These are your key financial priorities, and so they need to be considered in every single decision. But you also have short and long-term goals to achieve, so we can't focus just on the finances. We also want to promote resilience in unknown circumstances and stay true to your identity, which is where your fundamentals come in. Your base notes need to be considered in every decision, even the short-term ones. So this is an important part of the framework as well. Next, we want to reduce your financial risk and reduce your strategic risk. We do this by balancing budget reductions and costs in each decision, considering their long-term impacts, and continuing to promote growth and development, maintaining your market decision. These will vary with each crisis that you face and with each decision you make, but we return to these 5 core values every time. And now we move on to our second question. We've established the governance that you need in order to be resilient, so let's implement it right now. Let's look at whether or not you should acquire DRT. Now, you have a few different options. It's a little risky to acquire DRT right now. A $750 million purchase would be an interesting choice in a time of development if you don't have a backup plan to handle that financial risk. So you might postpone the acquisition, mitigating your financial risk while aligning with your financial strategy. However, this doesn't balance your short and long-term goals. You want to grow and develop your company, and postponing an important strategic development doesn't do that. It also doesn't follow your fundamental values because you're not delivering to your customers and staying true to sustainability if you aren't continuing to develop and grow as a company. While it does mitigate some financial risk by not outrolling this money right now, it also means you don't know about your company's future. If you're not growing and developing, you can't be certain of your market position. This means you're not reducing your strategic risk, you're not maintaining your advantages. Now, you could also focus on internal development. Rather than going through with the acquisition, put more money into the R&D sector that you value. However, this doesn't necessarily align with your financial strategy because that's going to increase your costs as well. It also doesn't balance your short and long-term goals for similar reasons of not addressing your current crisis, but just sort of walking around it. You're not following your fundamentals if you do this because you're not following that chain of pearl strategy that has motivated your recent growth. That's where you see your success, in small strategic acquisitions. And this is turning your back on what's brought you success in the past. It doesn't reduce your financial risk because you're increasing those R&D costs. All it does is ensure that you will still have some development. However, if you continue this acquisition with the right steps, you can align with your financial strategy, balance those short and long-term goals, reduce your financial risk, reduce your strategic risk, and follow your fundamentals. And here's how. We propose a 10-year R&D budget adjustment to finance the acquisition of this company. Your main concern right now is that you don't have the $750 million, and COVID means your finances are uncertain. However, there's a way to adjust this. If you go through with this acquisition, you're getting a key player, someone who can produce the ingredients you need. And your strength isn't in purchasing ingredients, it's in manufacturing them. So with this acquisition, you gain a strategic advantage that also means you don't need to fund as much R&D right now. You don't need the R&D if you're acquiring the people who you've noted have already surprised you and surpassed your expectations when it comes to manufacturing with sustainable practices and high quality ingredients. So, by reducing your current R&D in the next year to 5% of the budget rather than 10% of the revenue, you will save over the next 10 years, gradually increasing by 0.5% to return to a 10% budget in 10 years, you'll save over $850 million in the next 10 years. This is more than enough to pay back the debt that you're taking on to finance this acquisition, but it's also giving you more room to handle some of these short-term crises that you might face in the next 10 years. By sticking with your values-driven approach, acquiring, building on the chain of pearls, you're making sure that you have the financial stability and freedom to make the short-term decisions you need by not locking yourself into just one long-term plan. Like I said, this will finance over $850 million over the next 10 years. And as you can see, after 2031 and 2032, you'll be returning to 10% of your revenue for your R&D budget. So you're still staying true to your long-term values by focusing on R&D in the long run. By having this set and determined path to return to your current state, you're ensuring that your long-term is preserved just alongside your short-term. And so now we'd like to talk about the timeline for implementation.
So with these two ideas, we see two very different timelines. First, let's talk about the idea of implementing a new VP of inclusive development. The first responsibility would be to codify the roles and responsibilities of this role, make sure it's in the corporate governance documents, and everyone's aware of what the true responsibilities of this role would be. From there, in Q1 and Q2 of the year we're in, 2021, we can begin the internal search for hire. We are a meritocracy, and we know that at a company as large as we are, we have somebody that's able to do this. We've been able to communicate across so many markets and segments that we can find somebody internally, and by taking 6 months out of this year, I'm confident we can find somebody within your framework. Then, starting in the second half of this year, we would onboard this new VP hire, having them meet regularly with the executive leadership to ensure that they are aligned with what they're expecting this new role to do. And with the COVID measures, this is something we would take an executive vote to determine whether or not we'd want to suspend. After all, it is based on the current condition we're in. And in January of 2021, we're not too certain when COVID will end. We just want to make sure that we have a unified decision and when we can convert our production facilities back to making the fragrances that they had made previously. And now we can talk about the acquisition strategy timeline, which you see is going to last much longer due to the way that we are restructuring the R&D percentages. We're going to finalize the sale price early in this year, as well as the bond conditions that we've agreed on with the $750 million hybrid offering. Then we're going to develop the terms of integration with DRT. We're going to then launch a new budget strategy with this reduce in R&D beginning in 2022, as the budget for this year seems to already be locked up, and we want to make sure that this is a new change that everyone's prepared for rather than rushing into it. Then, across a 4-year period, we can launch the DRT integration as they have 4 production facilities, 1 in France, 2 in the United States, and 1 in Asia. Then we would like to start that in France and then continue to work westward until we are eastward.
Firmenich is a purpose-driven family business with a history of growth and innovation, spanning over 125 years. Their resilience in the face of uncertainty is key to planning the future.
Through our analysis, we identified 2 key questions. First, does your company refocus on short-term governance in order to maintain resilience? And secondly, should you acquire DRT?
Our recommendations are to implement the VP of Inclusive Development and have a decision framework for their major roles and have financed the acquisition with short-term R&D reduction for DRT.
I sprayed my perfume after I put my blazer on this morning. So if I take a second to smell it, all I feel are the base notes, that comforting scent that I return to at the end of the day, just like you return to your values. Your values are what make you you. They define your company, and they're what you can always rely on. Innovation establishes your ability to be dynamic and evolve over time. But what's missing right now is that rapid change. And you want to be able to trust that rapid change in order to handle crises like these, to navigate decisions like what we've presented you with today. This solution that we present with you builds on your strengths. It builds on those values and that innovative spirit, allowing you to find top notes that give you a cohesive business model, one in which you can handle anything. Thank you, and we'll now take questions.
Thank you. At this time, I will now ask the judges. You have 10 minutes to ask questions of the presenting team. I ask the lead judge to begin the question and answer period.
Thank you very much. I want to focus a little bit on the short-term plan for a minute. When I'm a little confused. When I think of governance, I'm typically thinking of things at a board level, and it seems to me you're talking about operational implementation. Can you help me understand why you're using the word governance to talk about this plan?
Yes, so we're using governance because this is something that spans multiple levels of the company. While it does start with some operational elements like the crisis committees, we want to centralize this in the form of the VP, who would be a high-level executive in the company. This means that they are influencing all different departments, and we want to emphasize this, as well as establish the fact that this is something that your company turns to in times of crisis. This is the foundation of your company decision-making structure, and it governs your decisions.
As a quick follow-up, why didn't you call it a vice president of crisis management? Why inclusive development?
We decided on vice president of inclusive development because you currently refer to your strategy for growth as inclusive capitalism. You want to care about the generations on the planet right now and the generations in the future. That shows that you care about now and later, just like this plan addresses, the present and the future. Inclusive development reflects your inclusive capitalism strategy, allowing you to handle the right now so that you can ensure the security of the future.
I'm a little curious how you landed on cutting the R&D budget for the next 10 years when one of your criteria for success is reducing the strategic risk.
So the reason why we chose the idea of cutting the R&D budget in particular is because the main purpose of this acquisition is to enhance our manufacturing capabilities. Something that really jumped out to us about DRT is the fact that some of their plants have almost full cycle use of the materials that go in and just very efficient waste management methods. So for us, we viewed this as essentially an R&D purchase. It's also important to mention that when we choose ways to finance the notes that we're putting out so that we're able to make this purchase now when the purchase price seems most reasonable, by cutting R&D, which is a cost, instead of basing this upon incoming revenue, we're actually cutting directly to the bottom line, as basing this on revenue would inherently include sinking the costs of goods sold with that. So it was important to us that we made sure this was a cost that we cut. And judging by the way we view DRT and what it does for our company, this is inherently something we can learn from. We employed the 3 L's model to analyze the business, and we want to learn from them. That is what R&D does inherently.
And so just following up on that, if we need to cut costs to ensure that we can afford the note, are you suggesting that you don't think this will be a revenue-driving acquisition and that we'll see retraction potentially?
I think it's most important to view this as safely as possible. While we do believe this is a revenue-driving unit, I think it's a bit short-sighted, given the knowledge that we currently have, to base this on projected future revenues that we're unsure of. However, we do know what our sales were average in the €4 billion range, and we do know that this is something we would do with a cost as opposed to a revenue because of the inherent benefits to the bottom line of the company. So we wanted to forecast this on what we did know, and we do know that this is something that enhances our manufacturing capabilities and that our R&D costs are inherently high compared to our business overall.
So kind of following on that too, so if we're cutting our R&D and then hiring a VP for inclusion and development, that's kind of like not really aligning with the cutting of the R&D, since you need to cut the cost but still hiring someone and paying for him. So why don't you think of maybe R&D can handle the crisis management and inclusion and development instead of hiring someone?
The purpose of having this new position is to centralize that work. While R&D has handled it so far, if you want to continue growing, you need your capacities to grow as well. It's also important to note here that over these 10 years, you save $850 million. The cost of the acquisition is $750 million. So this creates an excess space for you to implement these crisis mitigation structures, such as hiring the VP or other costs that might occur if there's another crisis in the next 10 years.
This VP role, if you could show the criteria right here, the motivating consideration. When I look at the motivating considerations, this is for the role, right?
This is for establishing the decision-making framework, which the role would use in establishing the crisis.
But aren't those considered? That's what the CEO does, right? I mean, I'm looking at this. Why do we need an external person to come in and take these considerations? Isn't it already embedded in the company with what's going on here? Why bringing an external person? And the other thing is, it's going to take a year to get this person on board. We're going through COVID now, so why bring in an external party? Why not just do it internally?
Thank you for your question. So to us, we view the CEO role as more comprehensive. Think about things like expansion, like handling different markets, and like making major driving decisions, whereas this role is advisory. This is something that reports to the executive board and is able to give them oversights on what's going on around the company. As a CEO, it's important that you drive the company forward in a variety of ways and make the major decisions. This is not inherently a decision-making role. It is something that brings up concerns, advises on key areas, and helps make short, quick decisions, which, as we've seen during this current situation, don't necessarily seem to be in line. Think of it as an organizational practice. Also, I would like to note that this is something we're hoping to hire internally, so I wouldn't think of it as an external source, but rather somebody that's already high up in perhaps middle management, right below the executive position, that we could funnel in to be in this role in particular.
If I may add to that briefly, you also noted that none of your family members are currently in the executive positions. This is a role that's about addressing your foundations and your fundamental values, something that comes from your family. So this also creates the opportunity to create a role that aligns with your family, giving them the chance to join that upper level leadership. It creates more balance within the company.
And then another question on the going back to the funding, the acquisition through the R&D reduction. Seems like one of the other criteria is you don't want to lose 100% family ownership.
Yes.
Why not? Why not reduce the family ownership, keep my R&D budget, and reduce it to 90% instead of 100%? Why is it so important to keep 100% versus maybe use some of it for external shares and bring in some money?
So your legacy is one of your 5 fundamental core principles. We stated that we cannot break one of these principles. By splitting up those 100% shares, that would break that legacy. So this was a non-negotiable for our recommendation.
You addressed a bit on the timeline of the acquisition when you were discussing long term, but you didn't address anything about how you're going to do this acquisition. Can you tell me 1 or 2 key risks that you're concerned about and how you're going to make sure that this is a successful integration?
Sure, thank you for your question. So one of the key risks that we considered during this was the ongoing pandemic situation. We do know that given the current travel bans and the no-fly risks, perhaps there would be difficulty in getting the plants fully operational. That's why, given that we aren't sure right now when the pandemic will end, we're integrating plants on a plant-by-plant basis, and we're going to be starting that next year. We don't see any foreseeable changes in the near future, so that's our mitigating plan by pushing this just a year in advance so that not only can we get the price and the sale and the bond notes figured out, but it's safer for our current plan of integrating given this hectic time. Another key risk that we considered with the acquisition was the potential for increased needs of R&D when we're launching our new business models in the existing sites for DRT. After all, while we do admire their processes and the learning we're able to do from them, we do recognize that it might be a bit difficult for us to fully incorporate our methods along with theirs, so there's going to be a need to combine these processes. The reason why we think this is a mitigating this is a mitigated risk is the fact that we've partnered with this company for over 30 years. And so given that fact, we have a long-standing relationship with the family that during the majority of this 30 years was still in charge of the company and under full ownership. And thus we'd be able to work with them on these key processes.
on the decision maker, you saw no financial risk in the acquisition, huh? I mean, when you looked at the decision maker, I'm always concerned when something has all green check marks. You know, there's always a risk on the check mark. I'm just curious why you saw no financial risk on that.
We don't see no financial risk. We're confident that you can handle those financial risks. Our entire R&D plan is in itself a sort of mitigation strategy. Undertaking the acquisition as it is currently planned with the $750 million price is risky. This plan mitigates that by generating you saved capital in the long run that you can use to pay it back. It's not that there's no financial risk, but that we've offered you a solution which addresses those financial risks. We've given you those top notes, those key details that allow you to play on your strengths and continue with the business development that you succeeded in the past.